like to welcome Susan Porgieter from Sabric. Susan is General Manager of the Information Hub at Sabric, not-for-profit company. She leads a team of experts to provide Sabric members banks with an array of crime risks, information, products aimed at preventing and detecting crime risks within their own operations. And I certainly have seen some of these stats, and it certainly has helped our bank. Susan is passionate about creating capacity for fighting financial crime and regulatory engaged with key stakeholders in the government and private sector. So Susan's topic today is e-crime in the South African, the facts. So we heard about what 3D Secure can do in e-crime, so now we're going to hear actually what is happening on the ground. So I'd like to give a warm welcome to Susan, and let's listen to this presentation with great anticipation.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for the kind introduction. I'm going to do my best not to stand between you and your lunch, so please don't be concerned. We will make up the time. I'm very excited to actually dovetail on the previous speaker's presentation. And the reason for that is because I hope that you'll realize what the importance of 3D Secure is in the greater scheme of things. So what I'm going to try and touch on very quickly is just to tell you when we say e-crime, what are we actually talking about? Because different people have different definitions. What is included, what's excluded. Speak a little bit about the prevalence in South Africa, then move on to some of the key factors like the take-up of technology, touch on the response and so forth, and then what I want to close with is just putting a couple of facts out there, not to be defensive in any way, but just to put the context of what we actually and the South African banks are having to deal with in relation to e-crime. So if we talk about e-crime, very interesting, and I still need to get my head wrapped around what the reason for this is in the South African legal framework today, there is no definition of cybercrime. You're aware of that? Very interesting. And even in the cybercrime bill that's now in the process of being finalized, there isn't a definition for cybercrime. So what Sabric has done is we've used the definition that was proposed in the ECT amendment bill a couple of years ago, sort of as our guideline. And we look at attacks on electronic banking platforms, electronic banking products, as electronic banking crime, and then the high end of it, the attacks on the infrastructure, we consider to be cybercrime. So if we were back at the office now, and we speak about electronic banking crime, we would be speaking about mobile and internet fraud. But because this is a payments conference, and because of the fact that CMP fraud was one of the large areas of concern when we look at the card channels, I've decided to actually include CMP fraud in my presentation talking about electronic banking crime. So what is it looking like? Now, these stats are new stats. You'll notice that there aren't any numbers in there, it's just trends, and that is because of our agreements with our customers. But the blue portions relate to CMP fraud. So if you look at credit card fraud, and this is the first quarter of 2016, 73% of all card fraud losses are due to CMP fraud. It's huge. It's absolutely huge. In my view, it's huge. If you look at debit, catching up at quite a speed in the 20s, and then, of course, you have also CMP fraud, where there are South African merchants involved, and that stat there, I know it's not very clear, is 38%. So you would agree with me that CMP fraud is quite something if you look at card fraud risk. It's really increased over the years. So let's move on to what does mobile look like and what does internet banking fraud look like. The top one is mobile. The solid blue is the number of investigations, and the bars relate to financial losses. So you would agree with me that there's definitely an increased gradient, and that graph stops at Q4 2015. The one below relates to internet banking fraud, a little bit of an up and down there, but also a definite increase towards the end of the year. If we were to put up first quarter 2016, which I haven't done and I don't have with me right now, you would be very surprised because there is an exponential increase in those two categories for this year. And it speaks to the whole topic and what we actually have to get our heads around. Right, so let's do the overlay, and I love this graph. I was having a huge debate with the analysts back at the office yesterday because my title is Upward Trend in E-Crime. I'm saying, how am I going to explain it to the audience if the lines are going down? But trust me, if you look at things holistically, you will see that there is definitely an upward gradient over the years. Now, let me explain what you're viewing at the moment. The blue bars, the solid blue bars, are the figures relating to card not present fraud over the last 3 years. And very interesting development is that one there. Can you see that? And I believe, and I've got no concrete evidence for this, but I believe that 3D Secure played a role. And the decrease in the number of incidents, unfortunately not a similar decrease in financial losses, but in the decrease in the number of incidents. So, and this is why I'm excited about the previous presentation, because I think there's a lot that we can still do to get those numbers down. The line is the numbers. Now, looking at internet, you'll see that there's an increase in losses, and if you plot internet against mobile, you'll see mobile is the green ones down there. Looking at where mobile banking is going and how products in general rely on the mobile device and all the developments in that area, I think this is the one that we need to keep an eye on. The number of incidents compared to the number of CMP, card fraud related incidents, there's just no comparison. So what this slide tells me is, yes, we speak about e-banking crime as if it is mobile and internet banking fraud. If you use the same scales, the conversation is a different one. Why aren't we speaking as much about CMP or with the same emotion about CMP fraud? Because that's where the loss categories really still are. So I personally found that quite an interesting position. So what are some of the drivers? Most certainly the uptake of technology. Some of you might be familiar with these stats, but it's a fact. People are using their smartphones for everything. And I quite like this stat. If you look at mobile connections, it far exceeds the 54 million that is supposed to be one of the statistics with regard to the population of South Africa. So you can say that everybody has at least 1.5 devices that are active. And that's going to increase. We must anticipate that it's going to increase. Yes, of course, it's not just the usage of technology, the uptake by consumers that is on the increase. Of course, business is also embracing technology, and I think a theme throughout this conference is how we can optimize technology and technological solutions. Guys, please don't think that criminals are doing anything different. They are loving technology. Technology, access to technology, the internet has been a game changer for organized crime. Everything is different, and it's because of technology. And I sometimes think that criminals are even better at taking up technology than what good business is. So, what is the response to e-crime? Oh my word! We sometimes, not often, but we do sometimes engage the public. I think the banks represented in the room, their call centers and complaint staff who deal with customer complaints can probably add pages to this. The media love to sort of interpret what happened when they hear about incidents, and you very often find that it's a blaming game. The consumer says the bank wasn't secure enough, and so it carries on. The bank might say, well, let's talk to the mobile service provider. They're also part of this value chain, and so the conversation carries on. Very, very emotional and lots of opinions. So my job here today is to put some of the facts before you, and I actually want to start out with, in my view, sitting at SABRIC and what I'm exposed to is that I really, really believe that the banking sector is taking security very seriously. Just from the little insight that I have from my desk, millions are being spent. Conferences like this focus on how we can actually do things better, the role of PAS, and so it carries on. So most certainly, security and safe banking remains a very, very, very high priority. The next slide would be familiar to many of you, and all it does, it just sort of gives you an overview of the different levels of security and what's out there for detection and authentication. I'm not going to spend much time on it, but the only point that I want to make here is that there isn't presently a one-size-fits-all. People are paying attention to options and differentiating between products to make sure that they have the best fit for the best product, and so it carries on. So banks are really, really doing what they can. So the question is, if banks are taking security so seriously, why are criminals still getting away with the money? What's going on here? Millions being put into investment and R&D, but in spite of it, organized criminals are still earning quite a lot of money or skimming off quite a lot of money. And in our view at SABRIC, and I'm not suggesting that these are the only reasons, obviously there's a lot of conversation to be held around this, but we believe it is because organized criminals are presently targeting the customer directly. Alternatively, they're targeting internet connecting devices. So that's where the focus of organized crime is at the moment. Either the consumer, who's the user, or the device with which the consumer is actually connecting the interface with the bank systems. So in that regard, I'm just going to cover two modus operandi that you might already be very familiar with. But if we look at mobile banking, not the biggest loss category at the moment, but what are organized criminals doing in the mobile banking space to get their hands on proceeds of crime? It's very, very, very simple. From the feedback that we get from the bank investigators and the police and our own analysis and experience, what they're doing is they are using social engineering skills at the moment. Lots of really, really unacceptably, actually sad stories that come our way of people purporting to be from the bank, phoning a victim, pretending to help them, saying things like, we just want to make sure that your mobile banking is working and that you're happy with the product. Security is paramount. Just to make sure that I am, in fact, speaking to Mrs. Porgieter, would you mind just giving me the first 2 digits of your PIN number? The customer knows not to share the PIN number, so the customer is actually very pleased that the bank is so sensitive about this and only gives the 2. And everybody's happy. The conversation carries on. Then the same official says, okay, can you just for security, give me the last 2? And then the last 2, now the criminal has all 4 digits. Those are the stories that we're hearing where people are being exploited and tricked into actually giving away their own information. It's not the only way. They use phishing, they use smishing and so forth. And then, of course, if they need to actually have the SIM card, a SIM swap follows. In many instances, in the majority of mobile banking cases that are reported to SABRIC at the moment, there is an element of a SIM swap, and then the rest is history. So again, it's not high-tech criminal modus operandi that are being used. The criminals, organized criminals, accept that banks pay attention to security. So they follow the route of least resistance, and at the moment it's working for them because the consumers using mobile banking platforms generally are naive about the top end of the security conversation, and they're being tricked into disclosing information. So that's what's happening there. Now, if we move on to the internet banking one, I don't have a slide on this, but very important for me to point out to you that in spite of public perception that every internet banking fraud also has a SIM swap associated with it. That's not factually correct. Okay? It's not factually correct. There are different ways that criminals get what they need from the victim. The one that I want to explain to you here quickly relates to phishing for one-time PINs. And we've had several reports of this happening. Can I talk you through it, or are you all familiar with it? Can I talk you through it? Okay, all right. So in a typical phishing scenario, very important to realize that there are multiple crimes being perpetrated. It's a cycle of crime. It's not a one-size-fits-all, now do it and it's over and done with. Very important for the criminal to start with the cash-out process, because if you don't know how you're going to get the money out of the system, why are you doing it in the first place? So they will line up their cash-out methodology first In the South African context, it's through the ATM channel. Why? Because of our exchange control regulations and so forth, the criminal needs to convert the proceeds into cash rather sooner than later. Once it's cash, we actually don't know where it goes. And I have the benefit of having my colleague Kevin in the audience today. And Kevin, if we knew where the money went, we would be very happy. Once it's cash, it's gone. It's gone. That's unfortunately one of the challenges that we have. So they line up that angle first. There's a perception that they use fraudulent bank accounts, a conversation for another day. They're not using fraudulent bank accounts. They're actually using real accounts, but I don't want to get sidetracked. I'm going to be in trouble with the if I cut into your lunch, but we can talk about that at lunch if you like. So what happens is the engineer responsible for putting together the phishing kit could be in another jurisdiction and sells off the phishing kit to a criminal who wants to use it. So you don't need all the skills in one group because you can actually buy the skills. Cybercrime has been commercialized, it's a fact. What then happens is the email that has the link in it is then sent to a pool of potential victims. And this is why you would get a phishing mail in your inbox from purporting to be from an organization with whom you have no relationship. The criminal doesn't care, because if they sent out 10,000 and 3 people fall, it's a good day. Okay, so they don't care whether you've got a relationship or not. They don't pay any attention to that. Right, so once you click on the link, obviously it takes you to the spoof website. Now, here the questions start. Now, in the context of the one-time password phishing exercise, as the input is received at its destination, which is under the control of the criminal, the data is being used immediately. So what would happen? I would type in my username is ABC. It gets sent and it's used immediately. I would type in my password, it gets sent, it gets used immediately. So effectively, there will be 2 people on the profile simultaneously. Lo and behold, what's going to be the next question? Your cell phone number. Why? As a backstopper. Okay, because we might need it if this thing doesn't work out. Okay. What happens then? They line up a transaction. Now, for money to be released, you need to put in a one-time PIN. So the next question is going to be, just to make sure that your registration was successful and that everything is hunky-dory, we have now sent you a one-time password that you now have to fill in, which comes through on your cell phone. You know you're not banking, so it must be that one. And you type it in. It gets sent there, it gets used, and the money's gone. So before the victims actually finished what they think is the registration process, for whatever it is, the information is used and the funds are moved. A lot of that happening. So that's one of the ways. I'm not saying it's the only way, but that's the one that I'd like to highlight today. So yeah, so criminals are really, really exploiting the customer. And they're using human behavior and patterns of behavior to achieve their own means. And I want to skip right onto a video that some of you might be familiar with, and I apologize if you've seen it 100 times, but I think it's very, very apt, and it speaks to the whole topic of conversation here. And that is how easy it is to get information of a customer off social media.
Taxi. Dus gewoon. Ik zie een school tegen Antwerpen.
Ja,
Insecten.
dat blieft?
Ik voel 2 insecten op je rug. Kan dat?
Ja, vlinders.
Slovenie?
Zo,
Een moto. Oranje.
Pas erop.
Zenit.
Oui, oui, bien.
Je hebt een vriendin. Julie de...
Ja.
Een boeiend liefdesleven. 3, 4 zelfs.
De 4e, daar zwijg ik meestal over, dus dat weten niet veel mensen.
Hoe is mijn spierscheur? Maison rouge, balcon, blanc. Ja. Ik zie geld, ik zie transacties. Maar kent je je rekeningnummer van buiten? Ik denk dat ik het wel weet. Die staat wel negatief op je bankrekening.
Ja?
97. Last month, you spent €200 on alcohol. Vorige maand €300 aan kleding gespendeerd. 8.
Ja.
5. Voor een huis dat van eigenaar gaat veranderen. €795.000.
Ja, maar eigenlijk.
41.
Ja.
Is dat juist?
Ja, dat is juist. Oh my god. Oh man. Ah, dat is, ik weet niet hoe eng.
Okay, so I think the point's been made. People blabber, hey? We love to talk. We love to talk. I always ask if you've got if you've got a Facebook page, why is your cell phone number on there? Surely your friends should know what your telephone number is. But people put it on. You get a form, you just fill it in randomly. You just fill things in. You don't think about why does the requester need that information? And criminals know this and they exploit it and they use it against us. So that was with regard to targeting the customer. The targeting of devices is a reality, and there are many, many security experts who are far better equipped than me to even to speak about this. I just want to touch on it very, very high level. It's definitely our opinion at Sabric that malware is being used to target typically those kind of devices, and there's nothing contentious about them. They are all devices that are used often to connect via the internet to banking systems and banking platforms. And then, of course, once the device is infected, criminals are able then to compromise data and to abuse it. So the message here for me is, how do we get the consumer to accept responsibility for device management? Most people don't think of their phone as a computer. They think of it as an instrument to speak on the phone. And if we don't get that mind change right, we are going to have vulnerability in the system. Banks secure or reasonably secure, the customer even reasonably educated with regard to the risk, but if the device is not managed properly, then there's risk in the system. So I think what I'm saying to you now is there's not a one-size-fits-all. We have to have multi-pronged strategic plans to actually address this risk. So what now? Technology on its own is not going to be the solution, and this is where I want to move into consumer education just quickly. And we must optimize technology, but without consumer education, we're still going to have lots and lots of challenges. So a fact that I want to share with you is, from a Sabric perspective, we're finding that traditional consumer education is actually a waste of time. I'm going to say it as it is. How many of you have seen those emails and warnings? Every time you go onto your internet banking platform, there's some warning from your bank. Don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. We're finding that consumers aren't even reading it. They'll click the I read it, and life just carries on. It's not working. So on behalf of our members, we've now embarked on a new campaign. I'm hoping that you've seen it in the media. It's called Scellum. What is different? It's now speaking from a criminal perspective, and we're hoping that with a little bit of humor and some excitement and fun, maybe people will listen a little bit better, and hopefully we'll get some of the messages across. So we've taken the character of Scellum, because most people know what Scellum is. I was very disappointed. I thought it was like an Afrikaans word, coming from my mother tongue, and then I was told it's actually not. It actually originates in English, but in other languages as well. But the point is that it's a word that lots of people can actually identify with, and lots of languages have actually adopted it. So you'll see our billboards. Have any of you seen them? What have you done about it? That worries me. Did you go to our website? Please, please, please go to the website. To just go and get the information. And then this is going to take literally a minute. We put this onto our Facebook page, and the point is anybody can be a scallop. Right, and we're just trying to sensitize people to think a little bit wider than how they were thinking about crime before. And it's not a joke about the lover. You'll see in next month, which is next week, you'll see that we're going to be focusing on dating scams. You will not believe what's happening out there, how people are being tricked in romance scams to give away their money and things like that. And Kevin's looking at me. It's not just females. It's men as well. It's men as well. But we'll keep that for the next conversation. So just in closing, I would like to balance some of the perceptions out there with a couple of facts. The first one is that people think that internet banking is the large loss category, and I understand that. It's because it's closer to the consumer's pocket. So they get very, very emotional about it. The reality, though, is that in the last 3 years, losses through CMP fraud exceeded that of internet banking by 77%. Huge statistic. So there's a good business case to be made to invest more in 3D Secure and those kind of initiatives. Digital banking is high risk. There might be some risk, but for me, the lack of digital device management creates risk. And I think we must pay more attention to that. Then there's a general perception that you need an insider in order to perpetrate electronic banking fraud. Our experience is that whilst there might be insider involvement in some of the scenarios or some of the incidents, you actually don't need it. It's the one crime type that criminals can do from another jurisdiction without actually having an insider. There's enough information out there and ability that you don't need the collusion or as a standard success factor. I've spoken about the fact that the criminals don't always use fraudulent bank accounts. They're actually using real bank accounts, and I think the DHA online fingerprint verification solution that some of the banks are embracing has added to that. And then just an observation around the SIM swap issue. Yes, SIM swaps do happen, but they don't happen in each and every incident. All right, that was very quick. How did I do time-wise? All right. Good. No problem.
Hi, thanks for that. My name's Herman. I just wanted to quickly ask you, in regards to prosecution of the crimes in South Africa, I don't think the current legal framework allows for a lot of the white-collar crime, as well as the police being understaffed, underfunded, and underskilled. How do you think this can be solved going forward? And have you seen an uptake in the prosecution of white-collar crime? The last figures I had from a few years ago was probably about only 20% of it gets reported, and only about 8% of that gets prosecuted successfully.
Thank you. That's an excellent question. I unfortunately don't have access to statistics, so I can't comment on that aspect. With regard to our view, and Kevin, please, if you want to assist here, you're most welcome to do so. With regard to our view at SABRIC, the cybercrime bill that's currently being developed is going to really go a long way to address cybercrime going forward. Okay? We've had the opportunity to look at it and to actually give input, and we think that it's going to be quite comprehensive in the future. Presently today, yes, there could be some gaps, but the bigger issue is probably resources and skilled resources. With regard to the prosecution of crimes and statistics, the only one that I've had sight of, and Barend, I saw you in the room as well. One of the stats that was shared with us was via the Special Commercial Crimes Unit, and that stat was in the 90%. Now, that is very controversial from where I sit, because I share your sentiment of not everything is reported. I also know that that is a pocket of what actually goes into the system, and it's dealt with in a specialized unit. So one would expect that that stat would be as high. But it creates, if a minister stands on a podium and shares that information, it could create the impression that we are cybercrime ready. My personal view, and this is not a SABRIC view, is that we have a long way to go. But having said that, there is great awareness of us having to create capacity. And there's organizations like ourselves, and Kevin spends days investing in education and capacity building within law enforcement. I hope that gives you some perspective.
Thank you, Susan. Any further questions?
Hi there, Charles Ackerman, Standard Bank. I see a lot of the stats is around card and electronic payments. What's SABRIC's view on the debit order environments and with all the changes that are going on with authenticated collections to try and solve this scourge that we all think is happening and taking place?
I almost had to ask for a chair when you said debit order. It's honestly, the problem has not gone away. A lot of work has been done, and within the PASA family, a lot of focus on it. And I think we are light years ahead of where we were probably 5 years ago. But we need to understand that criminals are not going to take day jobs. So what they do is they just look for the next opportunity to exploit. From a SABRIC perspective, and Kevin, you're probably better positioned to answer this, we find that the victims are not cooperating to the extent that we need for them to cooperate to actually have successful prosecutions. The victim is concerned about one thing, and that is being reimbursed by the bank. So until the victim is reimbursed by the bank, they're all shouting and screaming, and there's lots of action. As soon as SABRIC supports law enforcement 5 months, 10 months down the line, and we're trying to get a docket sorted out, the victim's like, don't bother me. I don't want to be involved. I don't want to go to court. I don't want to be in the passages. So we're sitting with all of those complications. We're sitting with the other aspect, and that is that these rogue entities are popping up all over the show under different names. So you'll block here and it pops up. It's like a balloon. So in summary, I think a lot is being done. Do I believe that we've got it right now? I don't believe we've got it right yet. It's still with us. Every media interview that I do, doesn't matter what the topic is, somewhere in the conversation, debit order comes up. And it's because people are still very, very affected by it and very emotional about it.
Thanks very much for that question. Any other questions?
Kevin, did you want to add? Happy with that.
Well, thanks very much, Susan. Well, the takeout that I've got